which was a time that some people would call peace, but I didn't call it that. It was just a little bit after Vietnam, so there wasn't what was recognized as a hot war. But I occupied Germany, and then later I occupied South Korea. There are U.S. troops around the world in over 130 countries. That's more than 2/3 of the countries in the world. Some of them in very small installations, some of them in the many thousands. And that's what Iraq fears. Once the horrible hot war gets over, which it must, it will eventually, and we certainly hope sooner rather than later. But they fear a very long, very unpleasant occupation, and they have reason to fear that. The U.S. is dominating the world, and the world doesn't like it. Veterans for Peace is veterans of every era. We even have members that go back into the 30s. They went to Spain to help fight Franco. We made all the remaining service members from that era honorary lifetime members a few years ago when there were about 100 of them. I think there are only about 50 of them alive now. And we have veterans of every era from then on, getting more and more Iraq vets, of course, but the majority, the largest single group of our members are Vietnam vets. Of course, that was a very active time for GI resistance. And it's so very exciting, as Virginia mentioned, some of the GI resistance that's going on now. And that's what Veterans for Peace really has been able to do the last few years. Veterans for Peace is a platform for veterans to say, I've been there, I know it doesn't work, I know it's a catastrophe. We have to find something better than war to deal with differences between nations. Place to be, because there's this assumption that all veterans think war is a good thing and are dying to go back and want their kids to go. That's totally bogus. We've been there, we know how awful it is, and don't want anybody else, just like Pierre said, don't want anybody else to have to experience that. But Veterans for Peace has been so very proud to be able to work with Iraq veterans against the war who founded themselves at our national convention several years ago. With 6 of them, they have about 300 active members now who are all over the country speaking out every chance they get. We work with military families Speak Out and the Gold Star families. And we work with the GI Rights Hotline, whose wonderful little pocket card I tried to run off copies of and couldn't get them straight. But if anybody has a friend or a loved one who's in or is looking at maybe going into the military, please come ask me for the number of the GI Rights Hotline. That is a hotline they can call, an 800 number, that they can get information about their legal standing and their possible ways to get out, depending on exactly where they are right now. But what their legal status is, if they're thinking about getting out, conscientious objection, all that kind of stuff. It's terribly important to have that information. The Veterans for Peace, Iraq Veterans Against the War, Military Families Speak Out, the GI Rights Hotline, several other organizations. Before we attacked Iraq this time, and I traveled to Iraq a couple of times during the sanctions era, and I agree with Kathy Kelly that the war started in 1991 and has never stopped. It's just back in a hot phase. But nonetheless, we founded a campaign, and it's not an organization, it's a campaign called Bring Them Home Now. I'm going to hand out these flyers, if my lovely assistant would help me. Thank you, my 2 lovely assistants. The reason I want you to have those is because on the Bring Them Home Now website are messages from troops on the ground in Iraq. And it puts the lie to what our government, what our elected officials tell us about how they have to support the troops by supporting the war, when we know that the only way to support the troops in this catastrophe is to get them out of it. And you can get the words of the soldiers on the ground telling how horrible, how atrocious, how disastrous, and how wrong is what they are forced into. Those words are on that website, and they are very useful for when you talk to your elected officials, when you talk to your friends and neighbors. There's a real lot of misinformation going on with regards to what the troops really think. The majority of the troops, like the majority of us, want this war to end immediately. Virginia mentioned the appeal for redress. We are so very proud of those young active duty troops who appealed. What they can legally do is appeal to their individual representative and say, I am being mistreated in the military. And over 1,200 of them initially sign on, and there are more every day. We're so proud of them. And one more thing I want to hand out before I stop is a copy of a fantastic column. This is not Veterans for Peace as much as it is the coalition effort here in Baltimore, but I'm just so excited about it. A fabulous column. A good number of you probably saw it, but I want you to have copies and give them to other folks if you've seen it. That was written, that was published in the Sun yesterday by Fraser Smith. It's regards to Senator Mikulski. We are really pushing Senator Mikulski to support the troops by bringing them home, which is the only way to do it. And Fraser Smith explained wonderfully how the citizenry is pushing our elected officials, and I want to hand this out for you. Thank you again so very much for being here.